Welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and these are the commanders that I am essentially obsessed with. They're the commanders that I have built around the most in the commander format, just an absolute ton in some of these cases. I grabbed a few that I have come back to the well with a few times. I've also grabbed a couple that I just come up with lots of ideas for because I think they're actually very underrated and very build-aroundable commanders. I've talked about all of these on my channel before, of course, and I've obviously made a whole bunch of decks with all these. I will try to put as many decks in the description as I can, the ones that I can find. Some of these commanders I built around a long time ago, but as many deck lists as I could find. Let's see how many I can pack down there in the description. As many as I can find for as many of these commanders I will have in the description below. Let's start out with Lyzolda, the Blood Witch, which I think is a very underwhelming commander. I think this is the first commander I talked about on my channel where I'm just like obsessed with it and I keep building decks around it. I used to actually have this deck myself for a while. There wasn't quite enough to build around back then, although this commander is doing a lot. There certainly is a lot more now. This isn't one of those commanders that fits into this commander has gotten a lot better because of the cards we've gotten recently category, right? So 1 black and a red, human cleric 3/1, pay 2, sacrifice a creature. Lyzolda the Blood Witch deals 2 damage to any target if the sacrifice creature was red. Draw a card if the sacrifice creature was black. And if the sacrifice creature wasn't black or red, this actually doesn't do anything. So if you had like a circuit mender in the deck, for example, I mean, you could sacrifice it just to get the card draw off your circuit mender, but you would get nothing off your commander's ability. Your commander's ability is basically just a bad sack outlet if you don't have a black or red creature. For me, I want a black and red creature. And yes, Lyzolda works on her own abilities. She can sacrifice herself to her own ability. And of course, she's black and red, so you'll get the damage and the card draw. I just think there's so much going on here. You're sacrificing. Obviously, the Rakdos color combination is great for sacrificing, so there's a ton you can work with there. But also, the throwing damage around the card draw, that's just great value. Obviously, giving your commander Death Touch means that you can just kill any creature you want. You can throw a Chandra's Incinerator in this deck, and now I can just always go face with the damage and hit my opponent's creatures as well. And funny enough, if your Chandra's Incinerator has the Death Touch on it, then you can just, right, do that and start killing your opponent's creatures with the Chandra's Incinerator. There's a match made in heaven. Obviously, giving your commander or any creature Death Touch in these colors is going to be easy to do. I think this is a really underrated commander. I've built a bunch of decks with it. I built a deck for myself, then I took it apart, then I built another deck for myself, then I took it apart, and then I built another deck, which I think I put on my channel. So again, I think that one might likely be in the description below. Lulu Loyal Hollyphant is one that, of course, I do have this deck. I think probably the majority of these, there are a couple here that I don't actually have paper decks together for myself personally at this given time, but most of these commanders I do, and most of them I have built a deck for myself at one point with. Lulu, I currently have a deck with Guild Artisan. It is a combination of a whole bunch of themes, sacrificing artifacts, tapping, all of that, because of course, this commander, again, is doing so much. 3 and a white, elephant, angel, 3/2. And I will just point out, this is an elephant and an angel. And I don't know if there's maybe a little bit you can do there. Maybe some angel tribal stuff. I would love to get a elephant graveyard for my Lulu deck. It's a very expensive card, but it does regenerate your commander if you can get your hands on one. It has flying. At the beginning of your end step, if a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on each tapped creature you control, then untap them. So you're putting counters on your creatures, you're untapping them. There's just so much you can do here. Again, in the video that I made about Lulu, I went over a whole bunch of ideas. I can do rebels, right? Because rebels are, for the most part, white and they are tapping. So any creatures that are in the tapping theme will work great with your Lulu. Any creatures that are in the +1/+1 counter theme will work great with your Lulu. You have to get that revolt trigger, so having something leave the battlefield is pretty important. Really easy ways to integrate that into your deck. Of course, the treasure tokens that I do in my deck are the easiest way to do it. You can also put like fetch lands, like I just cracked my Evolving Wilds, and then on my end step, I get this trigger. There's so many fun ways to build around that. And of course, because this is a background commander, you can go in so many different color combinations, right? I think a black-white version is a great version here. Heck, a green-white version is a pretty great, I mean, probably blue-white. They're all great. They're all great versions depending on the backgrounds you find that fit. There are some backgrounds dealing with +1/+1 counters. There are some backgrounds dealing with sacrificing where, of course, that's something leaving the battlefield, so that'll probably work. There's so many great ways. Again, I think I have at least a couple of decks that I can throw in the description for this commander. I've built a ton of ideas with this commander already. Vhal, Candlekeep Researcher, another background commander, another one I've talked about on my channel quite a bit because I just keep going after it. 3 and a blue, human wizard, 2/3 with vigilance, tap. Add an amount of colorless equal to Vhal, Candlekeep Researcher's toughness. This mana can't be spent to cast spells from your hand. So of course, because of the wording of that ability, there's so many neat ways to go with this commander. And again, like a lot of these commanders, they probably also are great in the 99 of a lot of decks. I've recommended Vhal in the 99 of a lot of my deck doctors because adding that mana can be used for a lot of different things. I have made a few different decks on my channel already. I think I've made a version for every color. So I made the blue-white version, the blue-red version, the blue-green version, and the blue-black version. And depending on the color combinations you have or the background you have, you can do so many different things. Your commander's mana can be used for so many different things. It can be used for casting spells from exile. It can be used for cycling because, of course, it can be used for abilities as well. I have my really neat combo that I came up with for my red-blue version of this deck where I am using Maskwood Nexus to turn all my creatures into every kind of creature, and then I can use Falkenrath Gorger. Let's see if I can remember all the pieces here to have it so that essentially all my creatures have Madness and Homing Sliver so that essentially all my creatures have cycling, and then I can use my commander's ability once I get it bigger, because of course making your commander's toughness bigger is a huge part of this as well, another thing you can build around. And I have my commander tap for a bunch of colorless mana, which I use for the cycling to go get another creature, but because I'm cycling a creature, it is being discarded, which triggers the Madness, which means I can cast it, but I'm casting it from exile, so my commander's mana also works for that. And of course, there's a ton of ways in blue to be untapping your commander and reusing it. I actually made a pretty good deck there. A deck I was very close to putting it together in paper. Not quite, though. I had another blue-red deck come up recently. Blue-red deck idea that bumped this one again, unfortunately. But of course, you can do a whole bunch of other things. All the ideas I put in the description below that I went with all the different color combinations. You can use some of them. You can use all of them. Go in a different direction yourself. I think it's a great commander. Plargg, Dean of Chaos. And this one really is, like, it's so funny how I guess probably a few of the commanders on this list are commanders that I passed over. Definitely the next one, and definitely Lulu was one I just completely ignored. And Vhal, I guess also I completely ignored. Pretty much all the background commanders I completely ignored when they first came out because I wasn't a big fan of backgrounds. And Plargg is definitely a commander that I completely ignored when it first came out because I just thought, what are you going to do with that ability? It seems awful, right? Of course, it is a creature on the back. And I thought Augusta Dean of Order was much easier to build around. And it's pretty good to build around. But we're talking about just the front side here, although this is obviously a white-red commander, which is very relevant. So 1 and a red, 2/2 Orc Shaman, tap, discard a card, draw a card, which that is alone just so underrated. Obviously, the draw a card, then discard is preferred, but that's also pretty good. You could just sit there looting, right? Any deck you want to build in white and red, a Method 2 deck where you just need a commander to help get through your deck, this is great, right? It's just a 2-mana commander that comes down, and every time I play my Plargg deck, because I do have one, it comes down on turn 2, and nobody's going to kill it. Nobody cares. In the maybe 5 or 6 times I've played that deck, I think I've had my Plargg die once. Usually he comes down on turn 2 and he sits on the table for the entire game. And I just sit there just looting through my deck. Just don't need that. Throw that land away. Get something else, right? That alone is really good to have. And of course, you can very easily build around that theme. But the real build around here, the ability that I thought was so terrible, and it actually is pretty neat, is 4 and a red, tap, reveal cards from top of your library until you reveal a non-legendary, non-land card with mana value 3 or less, and cast it without paying its mana cost. Put the rest of the cards on the bottom of your library in random order. So what this does, this is a couple of different things, okay? Obviously, on its face, it seems bad because you're paying 5 mana to get some random mana value 3 thing. That's not good, right? Why would you want to do that? But what it does is it hunts for a card, and you can make it so that this will, and funny enough, we're going to get back to that theme again when we get to the top of this list, but you can hunt for a very specific card as long as you only have 1 or 2, you could do 1, but I would do at least 2 or 3 cards in the 99 that are mana value 3 or less that are non-legendary. So that way you're guaranteed to hit them, right? This is a great commander for doing a secret commander scenario or hunting for. And in fact, it's one of the best, and maybe it even is the best commander for a secret commander theme. Obviously, got to be in white and red here. The theme I ended up going with was Seismic Assault. That is a mana value 3 card. It is one of the only 3 cards, and the other, another one is land tax. Of course, that's sort of a combo. Again, I use that word that way, and people are like, that's not a combo. Whatever you want to call it, synergy. Those 2 cards working in unison together work really, really well. Those are both 2 cards that are mana value 3 or less that I can go hunt for with Plargg, and then Glinthorn Buccaneer would be the third. I only have 3 cards in there that I grab, and of course, Glinthorn Buccaneer works with the Seismic Assault. It's a pretty great deck. It's really fun going down the rabbit hole of, I can't have anything in my deck mana value 3 or less that isn't legendary. So, of course, you put a bunch of legendary stuff in there. And then also you go down the rabbit hole of finding answers that are 4 mana value or more, right? So I put, for example, Settle the Wreckage in there because that's a great way to deal with my opponent's stuff that is more than 3 mana value. Flare of Fortitude is another way to deal with. It's obviously a great answer just in general, but obviously I can also cast it for free. But it is 4 mana value, so my commander won't find it, right? So jumping through those hoops is a really interesting deck building practice. I have, how many do I have? I have at least 3, maybe 4 decks already. I will put them all in the description that I have built with Plargg. I've built the deck myself, and I will be going over that, you know, in the coming weeks here when I get into my personal decks videos a little bit more. But obviously there's just a ton of ways to go with this guy. A great build around commander. Another commander I was very wrong about and that I passed over when it first came out, Ghost of Ramirez, depietro, one of my all-time favorite commanders to build around. I would say it used to be number 1, but it has now fallen to 2nd spot, bumped down from the commander that I will talk about next. And this guy very much, because of the wording on the card, I think confused some people and made him seem not as good. Certainly that was the case with me. So 2 in a blue, Spirit Pirate 2/3. Ghost of Ramirez depietro can't be blocked by creatures with toughness 3 or greater, so that means he likely won't be blocked. So this is another one where I actually have this deck. I have a blue-black version with Armix, which of course is discarding, so it works great with Ghost. And I will just say 99% of the time I have my Ghost on the table, I have no problem getting in for damage, because if your opponent has a creature with a small toughness, they likely don't want to block because of course their creature will die to your Ghost, right? That's the ratio there works out really nicely for you. They're going to block with a 2 toughness or less creature, so of course it's going to die. But most of the time, your commander's not going to get blocked, which will allow you to use that second ability pretty much every turn, which is whenever he deals combat damage to a player, choose up to 1 target card in a graveyard that was discarded or put there from a library this turn. Put that card into owner's hand. And the wording of that is very weird, and it makes you think you want to be using this on your opponents, which I suppose you could. I don't know how you would do that well. Maybe you could maybe just play the politics game. I don't know. Okay. But for me, there's so many directions to build around this guy with just using this ability on myself that the fact that you can use it on your opponents, I completely ignore. There is so many ways to build around this commander because of course it's getting a card back that is going into your graveyard, either from your library or discarded, which of course means it works great in the self-mill theme. It also works in the discard theme. The very first deck I put together with this guy, which I believe I have on my channel, was partnering with Ravos because I thought, wow, Ghost works great with Transmute. I love Transmute. All those cards are in black and blue, so I can discard it, of course, because Transmute is a discard. Say I discard my Dimir House Guard, I go get any 4 mana value card out of my deck, so I'm repeatedly tutoring here. Of course, because I have Ravos, I can also get my Dimir House Guard back with Ravos, so there it works extra good. But of course, Ghost can get back that, and it can also get back the non-creature stuff as well. So my Dizzy spell, for example, I transmute that to go get some 1 mana value thing out of my library, attack with my Ghost, get it immediately back so I can reuse it again. And the other thing that works here that you can add in, if you go back and do that Ghost Ravos combination, I never had this before, but now you can add in the when this thing leaves your graveyard. That's another thing that now works with Ghost. It was a little bit back then, but you could throw a Tormod here. Of course, Tormod can be the other partner partner here, right? You can have a Ghost and Tormod deck because anything you discard or mill that you get back into your graveyard will trigger your Tormod. So there's a great partner pairing as well, right? But this guy works so great with, I mean, cycling. That's another thing that is discarding, where I can cycle something, immediately get it back. Any discard anything. Obviously, just regular old looting will work here. It also works with the mill strategy. That is what my deck is doing. I mean, my deck is, I do have discard outlets in there as well, but it is a Persistent Petitioners deck. And if you have a Persistent Petitioners deck and Ghost is not your commander, it should certainly be in the 99 because it is just great card advantage. It just becomes pay 1 and tap draw a card, because any card you mill on your first main phase, obviously I'm going to use one of my Persistent Petitioner's abilities, mill a card, attack with my Ghost, and that card goes right to my hand. However, if I have 4 Persistent Petitioners in play, then I can tap 4 of them, I believe, to mill 12, I think is the numbers, how it works there. So I mill 12 cards. Now, when I attack with my Ghost, I have 12 cards to choose from that I can now put in my hand. I'm digging so far into my deck. And that is really great card advantage, especially if you don't mind things going into your graveyard and you get to pick, hey, I milled that really important thing. I can get that back, put it into my hand. That's fantastic card advantage and a great way to dig into your deck. And that's why, again, Ghost works really good as a Method 2 commander, because he just digs in for the things you want to be getting. And that is the newest deck I put together with this guy. It is a red-blue version that is a really hardcore self-mill. In fact, like, I'm just going to traumatize myself even. The blue-red version that will be in the description. I'm using Ludovic as the partner there just because card draw and I needed red. He doesn't really do a whole lot. There's a couple neat little combos here. And in fact, I'm doing once again the Monkey World combo with Warp World and Monkey Cage. And why am I doing it here? I'm doing it here because if I traumatize myself and I put half my library into my graveyard, then attack with Ghost, that one card I'm looking for probably is in the 30 or 40 or 50 cards I just milled, right? That's why he works so great in that strategy. I get to pick the one card I want out of all the ones I just milled. Then I could just shuffle my graveyard back into my library after that, right? Or I can perpetual timepiece, put stuff back, right? So what you can do is you can get, say, your Warp World and put it in your hand. But what if I just milled my Monkey Cage? I don't want that in my graveyard. I want it in my library. That's okay. I'll just shuffle it back into my graveyard with my perpetual timepiece, right? So all that stuff, you know, this deck, you'll see the deck list in the description and you will probably be a little confused by what's going on. I'm not doing a huge deck tech here with this, but that's essentially what's going on. I also have the Charbelcher combo in the deck. Not so much combo, but again, what's considered a combo? Who knows nowadays? But basically, you have Mana Severance. I get rid of all the lands in my library, which of course is way easier once you've milled a whole bunch of lands around, right? That's why the exiling stuff from your library and then also milling stuff kind of works together. Again, also works with Perpetual Timepiece, where I can shuffle any number of cards from my graveyard into my library. So I can not shuffle the lands back in, because then I have less lands in my library. So the Charbelcher works better. So this is doing a couple of different things, this deck. It is doing the Charbelcher thing. It's also doing the Monkey World combo. It's a really neat deck. It is one of the, I'm sure, again, there's probably several decks in the description below that I have done with Ghost. I've built a ton of decks with this guy. So many different ideas you can go with here. Again, because he's a partner, you can partner him in all sorts of different color combinations. Not the commander I have built around the most, though. That title is now held by Kethek Crucible Goliath. That's right, another commander I've talked about on my channel so much. Let's see if I can remember them all. And again, there's going to be so many Kethek decks in the description below that, I don't know, I might not be able to fit them all. I don't know if there's a limit to the amount of things you can put in the description of your videos. I've never done that before. So, but I guess my original deck text video for my own personal decks had 28. So let's see if we can approach 28 decks in the description. I don't know if I'll get there or not, maybe, but there's a bunch of Kethek decks I'm going to have in the description. So 2 black, red, Phyrexian Beast, 4/4. At the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice another creature. If you do, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-legendary creature card with lesser mana value. Put it onto the battlefield and put the rest on the bottom of your library in random order. So I immediately thought this guy was a great build around. He's just a great value-y commander. And when he first came out in Phyrexian LB1, that was the first deck I built on my channel with him. I did an actual deck tech on my channel where I was just doing a value-y deck. Just I get creatures into play. You know, I play a Ravenous Chupacabra, kill my opponent's creature. Now that Ravenous Chupacabra is just sitting there doing nothing, so I'll sack it on my end step and get a new creature out of it. Lots of ETB creatures, lots of value. I put unearthed creatures in there as well because, of course, you can get the unearth for like 3 mana and then sacrifice it and get something even better off of it, right? And it works with the unearth because, of course, you can stack the triggers appropriately so that you sacrifice it to your Kethek before it gets exiled by the unearth, right? All of that works really, really well. So I just did a good stuff value-y deck originally with Kethek, and you can obviously do that. But of course, the wording here is very similar, and as I alluded to when I was talking about Plargg, this guy is doing the exact same thing, and I will have to give credit to random guy that commented on my video, I think, that said this, because that's where I got the idea from. And in fact, that's where then I got the idea for Plargg as well, because I got the idea first with Kethek, which is he works great with the secret commander thing. Now with Plargg, you can do non-creature stuff. Here you can only do creatures. Maybe that's better though, because now I can put, you know, mana value, certain mana values of things in the deck where it, as long as it's not a creature, then I'm not going to be screwing myself over. Where with Plargg, I can only use legendary stuff, right? So you're less limited here. I guess with Plargg, you have more options, but with Kethek, you're less limited because I can just put lots of mana rocks in this deck. All that, it's not going to screw with me at all. It's just the creatures I have to worry about. And what I had, I mean, I've revisited this and I made a video where I must have had at least 3 or 4 different deck ideas. I have had a bunch more since. What I recommended was mana value 2 or less is what you're going for. The reason why is because, first of all, if you go too high, you're going to be waiting forever to get it going. Also, if you sack a mana value 3 creature, so that's what we want. We want to sack a mana value 3 creature to guaranteed get the mana value 2 or 1 creature that we have in our deck. And again, I wouldn't build around 1 necessarily, 2 or 3, maybe that fit the same theme. Again, I've already thrown out a ton of suggestions. I mean, mana value 3 is great because your commander's mana value 4. Again, I've play tested this a bunch, and mana value 3 works great because I can play my mana value 3 creature on turn 3, and then the next turn I play my commander, and I immediately have that mana value 3 creature that I can sacrifice in the end step. That's another reason it works. But also there's just a lot of great mana value 3 creatures that you want to be able to include in this deck. So if you go higher than mana value 3, then now I can't put a Morbid Opportunist in there. That sucks, right? Stuff like that. So my recommendation, you can do whatever you want. You can hunt for a mana value 6 creature if you want to build your deck around that. That would be difficult though, because of course now I have to put a mana value 7 creature in play in order to sacrifice it to get it with my Kethek, right? Because it's looking for lesser mana value. You really want mana value 2 or less. Any creature, mana value 2 or less, that you can build around. And again, I've thrown out a Goblin Welder. I did a morph version of this deck. That's a really interesting idea. They're all going to be in the description. You can go check them out if you're at all interested. I did a 7 Dwarves version of this deck because that's a 2 mana value creature that you can go hunt for, that you can kind of build around. Can't even remember all the versions I did originally. Actually, the reason I revisited this and why it is now the king of the mountain with as far as the amount of decks that I've built with a certain commanders, because I actually had a patron put together one of my ideas in paper. It's a little bit different than mine, but he went with my treasure hate or artifact idea. That's another one that I built around because there is several really good creatures that are 2 mana value that are in red, obviously, that are hating on artifacts. He actually threw a Disciple of Vault in there, which I don't know why I didn't think of that. That's a great fit as well. You don't want too many though. If you have too many, then it's going to take a while for you to get them all in play. 2 or 3 is the number I like. You also really, really need things that put creatures on the bottom of your library or cards on the bottom of your library, like a junk troller. Again, with the Plargg idea as well, very similar. You need stuff that you can tuck back on the bottom of your library or shuffle into your library so that if it gets killed, you can get it back again, right? That's really important here as well. The other versions that I've now done, because of course, once I saw him playing that deck, I got revisited to the idea of, oh, maybe I should go down this because I really like this commander. And I will very likely be putting together a deck in paper for myself in the near future that is a Kethek Crucible Goliath deck. Some other ideas I came up with, and I don't even know which one I'm going to go with. I'm still on the fence about it. What I might end up doing is, because the base of the deck is the same, what I can do, and as I'm building the decks, I'm doing the same thing. I'm keeping the same template where I'm only swapping out maybe 20 or 30 cards, maybe not even that many. I would say that easily the majority of the deck is the same, no matter the version I use, because I'm using all the same cards. I'm using, again, like a Circuit Mender is in all the versions of the deck, because that's just a great creature to sacrifice to my Kethek. It comes down, I gain 2 life, and then I sacrifice it to my Kethek, draw a card, and then go hunt for whatever creature I want, right? So that's in all the versions. So what I could do, and what you could do as well, is you could have several versions of this deck where you just swap out 15, 20 cards, something like that, right? Another version I came up with is I noticed there was a lot of creatures that are doing Harsh Mentor, right? So basically this is your win con as well, right? Where you just have a lot of these creatures that are just hating on, I guess it's sort of the group slug thing a little bit, but it's not really going to hurt you because of course Harsh Mentor only works on your opponents, so they activate abilities, they take damage. They have creatures come into play, they take damage because you're going to have a Bloodseeker in the deck. They draw cards, they're going to take damage because you have a Kethek Parasite in the deck, which of course you're going to have a red permanent in play. That's one version that I put together where it has a bunch of those creatures. But that version originally was built around Blight Pile. The only reason I threw in the other creatures was because I just wanted more. I didn't want just one creature to build around, and it worked with the whole draining of my opponent's life since they just sped up the process a little bit. But this is a Walls deck. That's right, a Kethek Walls deck. This is such a neat idea. So Blight Pile is 1 and a black Phyrexian 3/3. Apparently it's just a Phyrexian. It's not a wall. It's not an anything, but it has Defender, and you pay 2 and a black and tap it. Each opponent loses X life or X the number of creatures with Defender you control. So you just sit there playing walls, and of course I put a whole bunch of walls in the deck that are 3 mana value. There's a bunch. There's just a whole bunch of walls in general that I can put in this deck, and you can put more, and this guy just sits there, and of course you got this giant army of walls, so keeping your opponents off of you is pretty easy, and then you just sit there draining them of life every single turn. I also put Vent Sentinel in the deck. Funny enough, this is doing something very similar. Unfortunately, it's not 2 mana value, it's 4 mana value, but of course it's in the deck. You can pay 1 and a red and tap it. It deals damage to target player equal to the number of creatures with Defender you control. So it's funny, there's 2 Defender tribal cards here essentially that are in black and red. So of course they don't fit in that Arcades deck. So of course nobody plays them. Both of those cards, I think I've seen the Vent Sentinel before. I have never seen Blight Pile before, but Blight Pile is essentially your win con. Vent Sentinel is just a helper. And then again, I just threw the Kethek Parasite and the Harsh Mentor and the Bloodseeker in there because they just helped, again, obviously they're all draining your opponent's life. So it's just going to help move things along. And I wanted more than just one creature to hunt for. And then you just got a bunch of walls in the deck. It actually works really, really well. Copper Gnomes has a pretty powerful effect. It is a 2 mana artifact creature, Gnome 1/1. You pay 4, sacrifice Copper Gnomes to put an artifact card from your hand onto the battlefield. So if this is the guy you're building around, and of course he sacrifices himself, which is, can be really, really important. So the, Junk Troller, all those effects, you're going to need even more in this version because what you're going to want to do is, you want those effects already, but here, because you're sacrificing this guy, you're going to want to tuck him on your library so you can get him again the following turn, and you just keep basically repeating the process. If I have my Junk Troller in play, I just 4 mana, cheat some giant artifact into play, then I tuck him on the bottom of my library, and get him on my end step again, right? He comes right back into play on my end step. So this guy, you can go solo with him and just fill your deck with lots of expensive artifacts to cheat into play. I also, though, put Dream Devourer in here because that's another great creature to build around that I thought fit the theme. And it fits the theme for a couple of reasons. One, because you're in a bit of an artifact theme here, obviously, and Dream Devourer works great with artifacts because it's reducing the colorless cost of your spells, so things can be free. But it also works great with just really expensive stuff because it's kind of reducing the cost, right? So if I get my Dream Devourer and I have some really expensive artifact in my hand, I can foretell it and it'll cost 2 less on the following turn, right? So I thought it worked with the Copper Gnomes. Again, you could just ride the Copper Gnomes and do nothing else. Because it's sacrificing itself, it would be really hard for your opponents to permanently get rid of it because you can just keep sacrificing it to its own ability, tucking it into your library, just keep repeating the process over and over and over again. So you really absolutely could build a deck entirely around just Copper Gnomes and just 4 mana, cheat some giant menacing artifact into play over and over again. So that's another version that I built. And another version I built is a +1/+1 counter themes, because I noticed there was a few, and this one works pretty good. I'm still fiddling with it. You know, again, the probably more completed version will be in the description below. And I just noticed there was a couple of creatures that were that 2 mana value that wanted counters put on them. In particular, Emperor of Bones was the big one. This was the one that I found as I was playing the deck. I'm like, okay, this is the one you really want to build around that's doing a whole lot. Of course, we got a bunch of stuff in the deck that is putting counters on creatures. And as I was doing research for this deck, what I realized is actually a fair amount of creatures that are the 3 mana value we want, and also have a dies trigger where they put counters on creatures. Wow, isn't that convenient? So we have that creature come into play, we sacrifice it to our Kethek, and it puts a counter on our Emperor of Bones or one of our other creatures. Again, I have a few. You probably will mostly want to be riding the Emperor of Bones, and why this works particularly well is because this guy puts finality counters on creatures, right? So 1 in a black skeleton noble 2/2 at the beginning of combat on your turn, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard. And the funny thing is you can exile any card from any graveyard, so you can exile non-creatures, although I'm not sure why you would want to. You also could, funny enough, do the Tormod thing here again. You are exiling stuff from graveyards, so you could do a little bit of that. Now, why this works extra good is because, of course, this is a end step trigger, right? Whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on Emperor of Bones, put a creature card exiled with it onto the battlefield under your control with a finality counter on it. It gains haste, sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. And of course, it has adapt too, but of course, you can only use the adapt once. So we have to find other ways to put counters on this guy, which of course, there is lots of ways to do that. Sacrificing it at the beginning of the next end step, well, that's okay. Our commander is doing that as well. So again, I can sacrifice my Circuit Mender to get this guy out, and then on combat, I will have that Circuit Mender get exiled by this guy from my graveyard. Then I will adapt 2. I will have the Circuit Mender come into play. I get to gain 2 life. That's why ETB creatures and creatures with dies or leaves the battlefield effects work extra good here. It needs to be sacrificed in the end step anyway. I will sacrifice it to my commander, right? The finality counter is extra funny here because we're doing a bit of a counters theme, and why not throw a power conduit in this deck, right? A power conduit is already going to work great with finality counters because I can remove them. Nesting grounds as well. Got to put that in the deck because we could remove those finality counters on even to our opponent's creatures, but you can remove the finality counter to put a +1/+1 counter on your Emperor of Bones. Like, what a slam dunk that is in the deck, right? And then that creature gets sacrificed and goes back to the graveyard rather than getting exiled. So there's some funny shenanigans you can get into with the counters theme as well with this. Which one am I going to put together in paper for myself? I don't know. I think I likely will be this year putting my newest deck will almost assuredly be a Kethek deck unless I can come up with something I want to build first. Again, usually for me, it's like I have a pile of decks in digital form that I have had for a while, and eventually, in some cases, like my AO deck, it took about 1.5 years before I finally put that together in paper. My Minnie and Carl deck, which is one of my newest decks I put together in paper, I finally have that in paper. That took about probably 1.5 years before I put it together in paper. I still have not put a Kethek deck together in paper as of watching this video. Maybe I have, but as of recording this video, I haven't. So who knows? I think I likely will at some point. Will it be the next deck I put together in paper? I don't know, but I just think this is a great commander. How many Kethek decks do I have in the description below? I don't know. How many decks total do I have in the description below? There's probably a lot. They're all up for grabs. You guys interested in any of these I think they're all great build rounds. Again, you can take some of my ideas and run with it yourself, or you can take any of the decks I have made for any of these commanders, as many as I could find. Again, going back, my original Lyzolda list is from way back in the day when I first started playing Commander, so that list does not exist. My newest list, I think I'll have on here. Some of these, I just came up with lots of ideas. I will link the videos as well, where I talked about Lulu or Vhal or Plargg or, Kethek originally. And then as many decks as I can find, I will stick in the description. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.